Hey, future policymakers. Are you ready for a deep dive into something you'll probably see on your UPSC exams? We're talking U.S.-India trade negotiations. It's a bit of a roller coaster right now with tons of economic jargon, but that's why we're here, to break it down for you, especially if you're prepping for UPSC mains and prelims. We're mainly using some great articles from the Hindustan Times at our source today. So let's get started.
Yeah, it's really interesting how these negotiations are happening while everything's so uncertain globally. The whole trade landscape is changing, and these talks could have a big impact, not just for the US and India, but for like the whole world economy.
Totally. It's like a high-stakes chess match with everyone watching. So let's set the scene. President Trump's been pretty loud about his America First policy and how he's worried about trade deficits, especially with countries like India. He's even threatened to use reciprocal tariffs, which always makes people nervous. Could you explain what those are and why they're a big deal?
So reciprocal tariffs basically mean that if one country, like let's say India, puts high tariffs on stuff coming from another country like the US, then the US can retaliate. They put similar tariffs on Indian goods. It's like a tit-for-tat thing that can turn into a trade war pretty quickly, and that can hurt both economies and mess up how trade works globally.
Got it. So it's like a shouting match, but with import taxes instead of insults. And India seems to be in the hot seat right now. Trump specifically mentioned India's high tariffs on cars, which I heard are over 100%. That sounds like a recipe for some tension.
Yeah, it is. The U.S. says that these high tariffs give Indian car makers an unfair advantage and make it hard for American companies to sell their cars there. They want India to lower those tariffs a lot to make things fairer.
But wouldn't lowering tariffs hurt India's own car industry? I mean, those tariffs are supposed to protect companies in India from competition from foreign companies.
That's a good point. And it's exactly the kind of tough choice that Indian negotiators are facing. They need to keep the U.S. happy and avoid a trade war, but they also need to protect businesses and jobs in India. It's a tough balancing act.
It sounds like India's stuck between a rock and a hard place. But wait, there's a little bit of hope, right? Didn't India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal go to the U.S. recently to talk about trade?
He did, and that visit happened right after Prime Minister Modi and President Trump met. They agreed to really increase trade between the two countries. They're aiming for $500 billion by 2030. To do that, they want to make the first part of a trade agreement by fall 2025.
Wow, $500 billion. That's a huge goal. So even though there are these threats about tariffs, both sides are still actively trying to make a deal. It's like they're playing good cop, bad cop with each other.
Yeah.
But what are they actually talking about behind closed doors? What might India be willing to give up?
Well, based on what the Hindustan Times is saying, it seems like India might lower those big car tariffs, maybe as part of a bigger trade deal.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting for all of you UPSC aspirants. Think about what could happen because of this. How would this affect India's car industry, which is doing really well? Would companies in India like Tata Motors be able to compete if lots of cheaper American cars came in? Or would this give them new chances to sell their cars in the U.S.? These are the kinds of things you need to be thinking about.
You got it. And it's not just about cars. This potential change with the tariff shows that India's whole way of thinking about trade is changing, especially since they're having similar talks with the EU and the UK.
So it seems like India wants to be a major player in the global market. They're willing to open up to competition, but they also want to protect their own interests. It's a complicated strategy, and understanding how this all works is super important if you want to do well on the UPSC. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We need to take a closer look at the specifics of what's being talked about. We'll be back in a bit to go deeper, so stay tuned.
And we're back, folks, diving deeper into these U.S.-India trade talks. It's pretty fascinating stuff. Buckle up, UPSC aspirants, because this is where things get real.
All right, I'm ready. Let's get into the details. We talked about how India might lower tariffs on cars from America, but what does India get out of it? What are they hoping for?
Well, India wants to be able to sell more of its own stuff in America. Think things like medicine, clothes, IT services. These are areas where India is already strong and could do even better if the U.S. made it easier to trade.
So it's like a you help me, I help you kind of deal. But I'm guessing it's not that easy, right? There must be some things they just can't agree on.
Exactly. You're right. One big problem has been these things called non-tariff barriers. These are like rules, safety standards, or just complicated processes that can make it hard to trade, even if the taxes are low.
Can you give me some examples? I'm trying to imagine how these non-tariff barriers actually work in the real world.
Okay, so let's say you're talking about medicine. The U.S. has really strict rules about what drugs can be sold there, which makes it hard for Indian companies to sell their medicine in America. Even if the taxes on those drugs were low, all the rules and paperwork could still be a huge problem.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about lowering taxes, it's also about making the rules more similar and making sure the standards and processes are fair for everyone. That sounds pretty hard to do.
It can be. Countries often have different ideas about what the rules should be, and it's tough to find something that works for everyone. But it's really important to talk about this in trade negotiations because these non-tariff barriers can be just as bad as high taxes, maybe even worse.
So this is where those diplomats really need to be good at their jobs.
Yeah.
They need to find solutions that work for both countries without giving up too much.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
Ah,
And to make things even more complicated, politics inside each country plays a big role. Governments have to think about how a trade deal will affect different businesses and groups of people, and they have to think about what the public will think.
that's true. The Indian government has to think about the good things a trade deal could bring, but also about the people who might be upset if they give up too much. If they make too many compromises, people might think they're not looking out for India's best interests.
Exactly. It's a classic dilemma, and it's something you'll have to deal with as future policymakers. Figuring out how to balance these different needs and make tough choices is what good governance is all about.
It sounds like a real challenge.
Hmm.
But let's not forget about the good things that could happen if they make a good trade deal. I mean, if India can sell more of its stuff in the U.S., that could really help the economy grow, right?
For sure. A well-made trade deal could make Indian exports go up, bring in more investment from other countries, and create new jobs.
Yeah.
It could also help India get better technology and become more innovative because its companies would be competing with the rest of the world.
And we can't forget about how this affects India's place in the world. With China becoming more powerful, having a strong economic partnership with the U.S. could give India more influence.
That's a really important point. Trade isn't just about the economy, it's also about making alliances and having power. So these negotiations are about way more than just taxes and trade deficits.
It's like a really complicated game with economics, politics, and strategy all mixed together. I'm starting to understand why international trade is such a big deal in the UPSC exams.
It definitely is. And we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to talk about, but we'll be back in a bit to finish up and give you some key takeaways to think about. So stay tuned.
Okay, deep divers. We're back for the last part of our look at the U.S.-India trade talks. And remember, this isn't just some boring theory for you UPSC folks. This is about understanding what will shape India's future in the world.
Yeah, these negotiations are happening at a really important time for India. It's a growing economic power, a big player in the Indo-Pacific, and a country that's speaking up more about what it wants globally. So there's a lot riding on this.
So let's think about some what-ifs. What if India gets a good deal with the U.S.? What would that look like, and what would it mean for India's goals?
Well, a good deal would probably have lower tariffs and simpler rules. It would open up new markets for Indian companies to sell things like medicine clothes and IT services. It could also bring in more investment from other countries, which would help the economy grow and create jobs.
And if you look at it from a global perspective, having strong economic relationship with the U.S. could make India even stronger compared to China, right?
Exactly. It would show that the world's oldest and largest democracies are becoming closer, and that would send a message to everyone. It could give India more power when it's making trade deals with other countries and more influence in global organizations.
But there's always the other side of the coin. What if these talks fail? Or even worse, completely fall apart? What would that say about India and its place in the world?
That's an important question to think about. If they can't make a deal, it could hurt India's image as a good trade partner. It might make investors from other countries nervous about putting money into India, and it could show that India isn't ready or able to change its economy in the way the U.S. wants.
And strategically, if the talks break down, it could limit India's choices and make it easier for China to pressure India, since China is busy growing its own power in Asia.
Right. So both sides have a lot to lose. These talks are a chance for India and the U.S. to build a stronger partnership, but they could also make things worse between them.
So what's the main thing our UPSC listeners should take away from all of this?
The main takeaway is this international trade isn't just about money. It's about power politics and strategy. These negotiations show how complicated things are in the 21st century, and understanding all of this is really important if you want to be a leader in India.
So don't just try to memorize facts and figures about tariffs and trade deficits. Think deeper. Ask yourself why each side is doing what they're doing. What could happen to India's economy, its foreign policy, and its place in the world in the long run?
And don't be afraid to question what you think you know. and look at these issues from different sides. There aren't any easy answers when it comes to international trade, but if you really think about it, you can start to understand the choices India has and what might happen because of those choices.
And we have to thank the Hindustan Times for their great reporting. This deep dive wouldn't be possible without them. They gave us the information we needed to understand this complicated topic.
Absolutely. And if you want to learn more, make sure to check out the Hindustan Times articles we talked about. And for all you UPSC aspirants out there, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below with your thoughts and questions. We're here to help you understand the crazy world of international relations and ace those exams.
That's all for today. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.